tonight for a special presentation and turn the program over to Gail Penna, who will arrange this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to have you here. The weather turned out much better. I was really afraid we weren't going to have a meeting at all, and that Charlie would be calling and saying, I can't make it to Dalton from Lennox, so I'm here. Mr. Flint had given me some things that I had sent into the Eagle, and some of it was not printed. But he was at one time on the board of directors of the Mount Lebanon Shaker Museum, past director of the Lennox. I'm always saying Hinsdale. The Lennox Historical Commission. You're still a member, right?
Of the Historical Society.
Of the Society, right? Yeah, because you're a society, we're a commission, okay. And he's a writer, lecturer, great expertise on molded and hand-blown glass. And we heard his lecture, another member and I, May at the Berkshire Family History Dinner. Asked him if he would kindly come and speak to us. I think you'll be thrilled. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Charlie, and let you do what you do.
Thank you. Well, glass in Berkshire County, everybody wonders why it was here. And it's here for a unique reason, and it's a geological reason. And we have to go back 450 million years to explain why there's glass factories in Berkshire County. And there's basically 6. There was 5, but 2 in one place at different times. And when we go back 450 million years ago, I don't know if anybody ever remembered or studied plate tectonics, but our Earth's plates are always in motion. And 450 million years ago, the continent of Africa collided with North America. When it did this, when you have 2 continents coming together, you have the Earth's crust that's moving and forcing itself to go somewhere. And if you look at the east coast of the United States, the whole east coast, you have the Appalachian Mountain Trail that goes all the way down the land. If you look at the west coast of Africa, it's the mirror image of our mountain range. And that's not a coincidence. That happened because when the 2 continents came together, the Earth's crust had this upthrust, creating the mountain range. And if we go back 450 million years ago, there was an ocean between us. And on the edge of the ocean, like any ocean or any pond, there's beaches. And there's different types of sand. And the sand that we know of here was obviously beach sand somewhere along the coast. We don't know where the coast was because, as I explained to you, everything changed when the collision happened. And when we were talking a collision, the collision took 100 million years. I mean, geological time is, to me, it's amazing. I mean, it's hard to think in those terms. But we're talking 3 centimeters a year. In other words, the collision took at the same speed as your fingernails grow, to give you an idea. That's why it had to take so long. Well, what happened is when the continent of Africa collided, it shoved an awful lot of the Earth down under the plate, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 miles under the Earth's crust as we know it. And then it had to go somewhere because there was already an Earth's mass here. So when it came, part of the ocean, if I had a third hand, I could show you the continent of Africa here and the Earth's crust here, shoved it under, and then it had to go somewhere because you had an awful lot of Earth here. You had the whole continent of North America. So when it came, it had to come up, and it came up in the form of mountains. And pushing with it all kinds of minerals that weren't here originally. One of the minerals that we all know of most is lime. Well, lime is billions of years of the ocean's floor building up with coral, shellfish, all kinds of calcium carbonate, just building up, piling, stacking, and that gets shoved from the Earth's crust, being shoved, and through a metamorphic process, it gets packed. And the heat underneath the Earth's crust is like 800 degrees, so it's being cooked, it's being pushed down with tremendous amount of pressure from the land mass, and it's being pushed up into the air. What happens is we have the continent of America, North America was probably 3 billion years old before this collision. So what it did is it shuffled the Earth's crust like a deck of cards with 3 billion year old land. So you got new land, you got old land. And that's why, for example, the top of Mount Greylock is newer than the bottom of Mount Greylock, because when it came up, it's new land. And if you're driving around Berkshire County and seeing where roads cut through mountains and you're looking at the striations in the rock form, it's magnificent. Before I go, I'm going to give you the name of some books if anybody wants to follow this. I am not a geologist. I just study this stuff a little bit. It's all part of what I study. When you're researching stuff, you keep going back, because if anybody knows, if they do any kind of research, the more questions you have, and you try to find the answers, the more questions you get. You don't necessarily find answers to all your questions, you find more questions. And so what happened is the beach sand got shoved in, this is quartzite, got shoved under the ground, cooked at 800 degrees, gone through a metamorphic process, cooked, and then came out of the ground as what we call upthrust and became mountains. Then another thing happens. I'm speeding up geology. And my friend Ed Kirby, the geologist, will be very proud of me. I'm giving 5 minutes what he usually gives 2 hours in. And but we had many ice ages, and what happens is the ice comes down from the north, and the last ice age receded something like 18,000 years ago. And it's a mile thick, 5,000 feet thick, the ice, when it comes down. And that does, I mean, the pressure and the power of this ice is mind-boggling. So before we had our ice ages, our mountains where we live today are 20,000 feet in the air. We look like the Himalayas, literally. And we couldn't live here. If we did, it would be in the valleys. There'd be little villages similar to Switzerland. But the ice age came. Those Canadians are tricky. We weren't looking, and they sent this ice down. And it knocks off the peaks, it fills in the valleys, and then when it recedes, it reforms it again. The receding of the ice age, when it melts back, the pressure of the water melting off from this ice is 100 times greater than we see anywhere today. So the pressure of the water forces and digs and grinds and shapes our valleys that have been filled in. So I mean, we got shaped by the ice age by not toppling all the mountains, filling in the valleys. Then the water recedes. That forms things like we see today: lakes, rivers, and valleys. And what survives at the end of the ice age are the rocks. The edge. When the ice age receded 18,000 years ago, we were barren country. It was just rock and gravel, nothing else. The gravel wasn't here. The gravel was left behind by the glacier when it melted back. So all the dirt we have here was a gift from Canada. And rocks are, some of the rocks that we have boulders sitting on top of the grounds today are called erratics, and they were dropped down. An erratic is a rock that is not ubiquitous to our area. It's a rock from someplace else that was dropped off by the ice age. But one of those rocks that came popping out of the ground was this beach that was sitting innocently over here for 3 billion years, and all of a sudden Africa comes along and shoves it underneath the ground, cooks it, and pushes it under great pressure, and it comes up in the form of a vein. And somewhere along the line in our country, I don't know where, how, we haven't been able to resolve this issue. I'll explain that in a minute. We have quartzite. And quartzite, the quality of the quartzite that's here is the purest in the world, still to this day. It's 99.9, either 8 or 99.9% pure. Just recently I worked with a geologist. His name is Victor Owen from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he's bitten by the glass bug as I am, and he does tremendous amount of research and writes. And he came down here with a student. He's a professor a geologist and a lecturer and writer. And he came down with one of the students from, I think it's St. Anne's University in Halifax, I'm not sure. But he came down we went on a field trip to look at one of the quarries and to get samples. And he brought the samples back, and he sent the samples out to have it tested. And I'm pretty sure he said it was 99.9% pure. That is the purest ever found anywhere in the world, still to this day. They were very, very proud of it in the 19th century, the quality of the quartzite here. Going back to who discovered it, geology as a form of science really didn't start until the 1830s. And so that makes you wonder who had the knowledge. Larrabee was one of the governors in Massachusetts, and he was setting up land grants, luring people from the Cape and the Boston area to come out here and settle. This was pretty rough country. It took, I think, for the early settlers only 44 days to get here, to give you an idea. It was pretty rough. No bridges, no mass turnpikes, nothing. There was just mud and swamp and rivers. Think about all the rivers when you're driving along the Mass Pike, all the low areas. Just picture some poor guy coming here with a team of oxen, a wagon filled with his supplies, following his dream. And but there was water power here. There was minerals. Now the minerals, how do they know? The study of science, of geology didn't exist. We haven't been able to answer that question. I mean, there were people that knew, but the governor had enough sense to send somebody out here to test it. Well, there's no boring testing. There's no way to look at the ground underneath it. We're talking, 1730, 1740. We're talking early, and but they knew. They knew what minerals are here. They knew there was iron ore. And they set up land grants, and one of the land grants that was set up here in Lee was called the Larrabee Glassworks Grant. And that tells me, in the 18th century, they knew that they couldn't make glass here. They wouldn't set up a glassworks grant if there was no material to make glass with. And so that's still the big mystery that we're still trying to solve today. But I do have records that they were making glass sometime after 1765 in Lenox, and prior, we've narrowed it down to just this, after 1765 and prior to 1820. That was the earliest recorded knowledge that there was glass making in this area. We know that there was a tremendous amount of attempts to make glass in 1812. And I know that they made reference to the Washington quarry. There's two areas of quarries. There's many quarries, but there's two areas of quarries where there was outcropping of glass, quartzite for making glass. And one of them is in the town of Washington, Lake Ashley Lake, Lake Ashley. And then on both sides of it, we were only able to find one quarry. Then, of course, in Cheshire is on the right-hand side of Route 7 going north. There's quite a few areas there that the sand exists, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So we don't know how or why or who found the quartzite and the other minerals that are here to lure people here. But it was very, very appealing. And the glass sand that we have here is, at that time, today they don't need glass as pure as they do. They have all kinds of wonderful methods for purifying glass, and they don't need to have such pure. In case somebody asks me afterwards, why don't they still mine the sand here? They don't need to anymore, unfortunately. Or fortunately, because it would be a big industry. We'd be having quarries everywhere. The earliest glassworks, going back to that again, the reason why we know that there was glassworks in Lennoxdale, there was the first iron works started in 1765, and that started with the grant that was called the Larrabee Glassworks Grant that was granted to two gentlemen in the town of Lee. Somehow they were bad. They misused the funds, and I don't know what happened. They don't really go into great detail, But the governor took the grant away from those people, and they gave it to the grant in Lenoxdale to start an ironworks. But it didn't rule out glass making. It was still called the Larrabee's Glassworks Grant. And we found several mentions that they were making glass prior to 1820. I think for them to keep their grant money, I think the ironworks probably was forced into a certain amount of glass making. The governor, to set up grants in Berkshire County, he had to have an equal balance. He had to have a grist mill, he had to have a Foley mill, he had to have a sawmill. He had to have all the things everybody needs. And glass is one of the things people need. Window glass, hollowware, anything. Bottles, they needed bottles. And so the more self-sufficient the Berkshires was, the better it was for the governor. It made him look good. I have never been able to find anything else on this. I do know that they got their sand from Washington. And the sand in Washington seems to be the first discovery of sand for making glass. And when they got here, it was just sticking out of the ground, basically. It was there, but they couldn't miss it. If any of one of you ever saw the sand, this is what you're going to see. 99.9% of the world would not know that that's, you'd see the sandstone, but you wouldn't necessarily know that this is the quality used for making glass. And when this is washed, it is pure white. I do have a little bit, and it's still a little bit colored. It does get a little whiter than this, and I'll pass this around for everybody to see this. I dug this up myself on site. And so I find it amazing that somebody knew that this was quartzite. And quartzite basically is quartz crystals. Minute amounts of quartz crystals basically all packed together very, very tightly, caused by that metamorphic process I just described. And in here is another little mineral, very, very light, and it's what gives it the slight off color, and it's feldspar. It's a little clay-like matter. Well, for glass making, they had to wash the feldspar out. And so what they did was they quarried out rocks. We call them headstone size. The stones were probably roughly around that size. And it was bull work, it was hard work. And they had to haul it to a brook where there was a wash house. If anybody ever looks at any maps, or if you go up into the town of Washington, there's a reservoir up there called Sandwash Reservoir. Well, Sandwash Reservoir, the water that comes out of Sandwash Reservoir is called Roaring Brook. Well, the state engineers that researched that whole area must have known that there was a wash house there for washing sand, to name the reservoir after the process. This is a piece of quartzite from the Washington quarry. It all looks very similar, whether it's from Washington or Cheshire. There's no way to tell the difference. The technical name of it is called Cheshire quartzite. They name it after the geologist that discovers it, names it after the area that they find. So obviously he found a piece in Cheshire and it got called Cheshire quartzite. There is a quartzite called Dalton quartzite. Dalton quartzite has other minerals mixed in. It can't be used for anything other than hearthstone or building, but you can't use it for making glass because there's many other, there's granite, there's larger pieces. It's almost a darker color. You see it. You have to take a magnifying glass sometimes to see the real quartzite that's mixed in with it, and sometimes you can see larger pieces of it. So it all gets named after the area the geologist decides that's where he discovered it, that's what it's called. So if there was an outcropping of this in northern Vermont, and it was the same stuff, it would still be called Cheshire quartzite. And it's the name issued to this. Obviously there must be a large vein if there's an outcropping of it in Washington of the same quality as, it's quite a distance between the town of Washington and Cheshire. And that's an important issue. And that is what tells me that the glassworks that were started in North County didn't know that they were sitting right next to very rich veins of quartzite. For example, one attempt two honest attempts at making glass. One of them was the Farmers Glass Works in 1812, and that was in Clarksburg, Mass. And it was started by a group of farmers, and they were going to go into the glass industry. And they made, I guess there's a school there that has some rondelles that that came from that glass works. I haven't seen them yet. I'd like to see them and photograph them for my record. But they made utilitarian ware, household ware, and they made most likely bottles. Any glass that was made at that period is called free blown, no molds. They used, they had access, they had round outs in wood that was kept wet, and they would shape the bottles round. But they didn't have a mold that they blew it in and you took it out and you got a beautiful flower. They didn't have that kind of technology. That kind of technology existed probably around 1810, 1820, but it wasn't here. It wasn't used here. They were primarily looking to make utilitarian ware and window glass. Window glass at that point was made from a rondelle, and they would take a blowpipe and they would blow a flat disc at the end. Almost any glass blower that's making something always starts with a bubble at the end of the blowpipe, and it gets bigger according to the amount of glass they have. And when they make a rondelle, they keep spinning it, so it's like a big flat disc. And they have tables that they spin it on. They have great big arms, and they spin it, and they heat it, and they spin it, and they try to make it as big and as flat as they can possibly make it. Then they take and they cut window glass out of that. I don't know if anybody remembers in the Salem area, some of the houses have little diamond-shaped windows. Well, it's really kind of the largest they could get it. They had no choice. As the evolution of glassmaking went on, the glass to put in windows got bigger. Now's a good time to bring up my hippie statement. My favorite one, because I get asked a lot at glass things. Before you asked me this question, there was a time when they thought glass was a liquid. It was always in motion. I've always argued that point. I've always said no. I stood my ground. Glass is not a liquid, it's a solid. It has to be a solid. And I heard there's a young lady with a British accent that does this science show on public radio, and I can't remember the name of it, but she ran it about 6 months ago. I was in my car listening, and she did this whole thing on glass, and I cringed when she said glass was a liquid. And of course, since then, the scientists have proven that glass isn't a liquid unless it's melted. It's really a solid. And there's reasons why for a long time they thought glass was a liquid, but it was because they couldn't prove that it wasn't. Now they proved that it wasn't a liquid. But my favorite thing is people would take windows apart in old houses, and one side of the glass was thicker than the other. Well, in all fairness, they don't remember whether the thick was on the top or the bottom. So some brilliant person came along and decided, well, it must have been on the bottom. Glass is a liquid, of course it moves, and it got bigger. Well, think about it. They dig up glass bottles 4,000 or 5,000 years old, and how come they're not all at the bottom? How come they're not all flat? They're delicate little things. They're wonderful bottles. Glass didn't move. So if you got a house that's only 200 years old and the glass moved to the bottom, it's impossible. It's really impossible. So if it doesn't move in 4,000 years, it's surely not going to move in 200 years. So what happens is that glass either came from a rondelle, and the closer you get to the center of the rondelle, the thicker the glass gets. Or if they make rondelle glass, cylindrical glass. Cylindrical glass is imperfect. When they made glass, window glass, it was not perfect. They did the very best they can, but there was no consistency to thickness. So when they cut it, some side is going to be thicker than the other. So when they put it in windows, they just didn't, when they took it out, they just didn't pay attention to what it looked like, where the thick part was or wasn't. So my feeling about the days of the hippies is they sat around and looked at the window and said, yeah, man, that glass is moving, I can see it, you know. Yeah, that's a liquid, man. So anyway, glass is a solid, and glass is never in motion.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
What did they do with Flintstone, which was we had Flintstone Farm up here on Route 9, and they
Yes.
manufacture, do they mine the Flintstone?
Well, that's my
You would probably
family.
know.
That's my family. When my kids were really young, I told them they wanted to know where the family name came from. And I said, well, Adam and Eve's last name was Flint, and her maiden name was Stone. I mean, nobody else claimed it, so how are you going to prove wrong? Flintstone is a quartzite. It's a family of quartzite.
So it was
And when they,
glass.
believe it or not, yes, flint glass originally came from, they added flintstone. They added flint to the glass, but they discovered lead was better. Yeah, but I don't know how long ago they used flint, but they used it long enough that they called it flint glass. But the name stayed the same even though they never used flint again. So, but it's no relation to me. Yeah. Good question. Good question. So anyway, the Farmer Glass Works in Clarksburg only lasted to 1814, 2 years. I know roughly where it was. I've been up there, I poked around. I haven't been able to find any slag glass or any proof of exactly where it was. It's pretty well grown up. It's very difficult to go to these sites. And it's very difficult in the sense you got people's private property and they're not, most of your explorations go on during the day and people are not home. It's really uncomfortable. You can walk up and down the brooks, I guess, or whatever have you. It was a little uncomfortable for me to be there. I didn't really know anybody. But one of the reasons why they didn't do well, one, they were undercapitalized. I mean, it was very, very expensive and to make glass. Now, I'll explain to you the process as we go along. But they did build it. They were able to build a furnace. They were able to purchase sand from Washington. Now, Clarksburg is even a much greater distance, and they were in 1812, 1814. And the cost of it was really prohibitable for them to be hauling. They had to pay, they called people to run wagons, Teamsters. These Teamsters made a lot of money back then. And the cost of doing it and the time it took to process the sand, to load it onto the wagons and haul it to Clarksburg was a really big deal. Not taking into account all the other costs of setting up a glassworks. They went undercapitalized. Same thing happened in Cheshire. If anybody, when you're going to up Route 8 to Cheshire, there's a bend in the road with a little, like a small pond on the left. And Bedard's is up here on the right, and there's Volvo. That little pond was the entrance to the quartzite mine, and it got filled in by the road. It was bigger, and it got filled in with water, of course, after it's not explained to you how it got filled in by water. It was very interesting. A gentleman, or Captain David Brown from Cheshire, made an attempt to start a glass works, and also in 1812. And again, he was hauling the sand from Washington, and the cost was unbelievable. He literally lost a fortune. He started it with his 2 sons. It doesn't say that he went bankrupt, but it sounded like he really took a pretty big hit. The sad part of it is, around, the land was sold then, and around 1840, somebody bought it to put in a grist mill. And in the process of digging a hole for the water wheel, they struck the richest core of quartzite ever found in Cheshire. And so the poor guy that built the glassworks on top of, the richest quartzite in the world never knew it. Never knew it. And so the Cheshire Sand Company mined that until I tried to get all the dates correct for this today, and I couldn't quickly find it. I have a pile of notes like this on Glassworks, Berkshire County. But I think it was around the 1870s. They were mining. I think they were down quite a distance, and they haul everything out on carts. And sandstone is fairly unstable. They had men going down into this cavern in the ground. And the foreman had enough sense to realize that there was a storm coming up the valley. And he just had this feeling, it sounded horrible. He had feeling that he had to clear the mine out. He felt that it was just something very dangerous sounding about this storm coming, very unusual. And he cleared out the mine, and I guess shortly after the last man got out of the mine, the heavens opened up, and it was one of the worst rainstorms recorded at that point. And at that point, there was a huge explosion. The mine caved in and closed up the mine and filled up with water. They had pumps pumping the water out of these mines. And of course, with everything at a halt, the water from all the fissures and that water that's there now is naturally from the ground. I do know somebody that sent divers down to explore it all, and there's still an awful lot of tattletale signs that there was mining there. I was going to bring a drawing of what they made that time, but it all basically filled in after it collapsed. It's not that deep anymore, but you can see the some of the structure of the outside of the caves and stuff like that where they were. So they had a tremendous dilemma. They had a huge industry employing 150 people at that point. Now this is just the sand industry. This is not the glass industry. The sand industry turned out to be quite the industry, and there's quite a few different people mining quartzite at that time. No, they were just starting to mine quartzite at that time as a big business, because glassworks from everywhere were demanding this stuff. Now, the Sandwich Glassworks in Sandwich, Mass. Are most of you familiar with the Sandwich Glass? They bought all their sand from here. Anytime you ever touch a piece of sandwich glass, you're touching a piece of the Berkshires. They bought first from the Washington quarry. Then they were buying it from the Cheshire quarry. But they were buying 200 barrels a year. That's a lot of sand. And I'll explain to you the process they had to go through to make that sand. They sent out. They were really desperate for sand. They were just sending people everywhere, and then they found, through their research, they found very, very rich outcroppings on top of the mountains. We've visited a lot of the quarries in Cheshire, and there was some beautiful, still to this day, there's beautiful quartzite. One of the quarries I went to, the ground was just covered with like a moss and leaves and grass. And then all of a sudden you see the most beautiful sight in the world is an anthill. But the anthill was pure white. I took a picture of it. It was just really, really pretty. And you saw that. And so what they did is basically they took the top of the mountain right off. And quarrying in those days is different than we think of today. They didn't have the technology to go down. They could do a cave, but they couldn't do really an open pit mine. They didn't have the equipment to do that, to get it out safely, and they didn't really, it wasn't that possible. So to have it on top of the mountain where they could use gravity to bring it down was a gift from heaven for them. And they had an endless source. And they stayed in business for a long time. I couldn't find where the last person had the business of sand was, but they sent sand everywhere. My favorite story about where they sent sand was in the Berkshire Eagle in 1878, I believe. A company, I'm not sure if it was the Lane gravel bed or which gravel bed it was, or sand bed. They sold sand to either an optical company, an iron company in Tel Aviv. And the people in Berkshire County were quoted in the Eagle as that they can't believe that we can sell sand to the desert people. You know, it is kind of funny, but of course, their sand is different. You can't do with the sand there that you can do here. And they needed the purity, and the reputation of the purity of the sand here was just unbelievable. And the reputation followed it, and that's why business was booming. Well, the next glass works was Sand Lake or Rensselaer. I don't know if anybody knows that part of New York State near Troy. That started around, let me see, started in 1806, and they got most of their sand from here. They bought it from the beds, they hauled it over there. They had a big operation. They had great glass blowers that they brought in from Europe and from South Jersey, where the great glass blowers were from. And they were making all kinds of things. They were making bottles. They were using molds. They were making utilitarian ware and whimsies. And they had a very big operation, very successful, and it was the only way to really go in the glass industry. And when I said to you earlier, when you do research and you research questions and you research information, you stumble across things. You stumble across things that are so amazing. And one thing leads to another. I got a little bit addicted to the Underground Railroad because I found that when they sent barrels of sand over to Sand Lake, to the glassworks, when the barrels came back, they weren't empty. I know, they were smuggling the sand as slaves. I think there was something like 20 different routes coming through Berkshire County, and that was, the glassworks was one of them. The Shakers were involved with the Underground Railroad. I don't like to talk about that. And anyway, so I did get very addicted to the Underground Railroad. It was very exciting. That's a tremendous challenge because there's so little written material. It was completely illegal to assist people, but the underground the work that goes underground that was quietly done was amazing. Anyway, a strange thing happened in 1853 at Sand Lake. Glass has to be cooked 24 hours a day. You have to keep the heat up. Glass cooks at 2,800 degrees temperature. Think about that. If you got your oven, anybody that has an oven on 400 degrees, when you open that door, that puff of heat that comes out will almost knock you over. Make that 8 times greater, and that's what the glassblowers had to deal with in this glory hole that they had, and 28 degrees temperature coming through that hole. The guys, the night shift people, all their job was to tend the fires and make sure everything's up. Well, they started, there's rumors that either they fell asleep or they were playing cards, they weren't paying attention. Something happened, an animal or something knocked over a kerosene light in the hay or in some combustible material, the place burnt up. And not only did it burn up, but the crucibles were full. And they said the explosion was amazing. Things falling into the vats, it just blew up. And they said the next day it looked like winter because there was icicles hanging from all the trees. You know, the molten glass had blown up in the air, came down. I tried really hard to get an example of one of those icicles, but I haven't been able to find one yet. I come close though, I come close. Anyway, it was a very successful business, and there was no reason to close it. So what they did is they did a little research, and they did a little exploratory work about where to be, and they picked Berkshire Village near the mall. And it was a perfect location. There was a railroad, there was water, and it was much closer to the sand source. It made a lot of sense. So they were up and running around 18, the dates are a little confusing. It doesn't make much sense to me. I know that the Rensselaer or the Sand Lake Glassworks blew up and closed down in 1853. And it said that at 1854 that they opened. Well, that's only 1 year. I can't picture them opening the glassworks up in 1 year. I would say it probably took them more like 2 years before it was really in operation. And they changed the whole operation. They discovered that there was more money to be made and there was a bigger need for glass, for windows. And so basically they went that direction. And so they took all these very talented glass blowers and they put them into production bases making glass for windows. Well, glass for windows, they couldn't make really big pieces with rondelles. So what they did was they had blowpipes. This is a blowpipe that would have been used to make cylindrical glass at the Berkshire Glassworks. One man would be using this. I have photographs of a man standing like this with glass on the end of this. And what it is, it's about an 18-inch diameter tube that's 8 feet long. And to give you an idea, the glass had, I have no idea how much the glass weighs. If anybody can come up and lift this up later to give you an idea how much this weighs. Well, it has to double or almost triple in weight. And what they did was they made a big cylindrical tube, and they would cut the ends off, make a hollow cylindrical tube. Then they would slice it down the center, and they would fold it out, and they had plate glass. That was the only way. And I'm pretty sure that plate glass, that method of making cylindrical glass, happened either in Lennoxdale, the invention of it, or in Berkshire Village, but it was invented there. The glass blowers at Berkshire was a lot of fun because they were unbelievably talented. They were much more talented to be making than to be making window glass. It was pretty boring. And at the end of the day, they would make wonderful whimsies. I brought one with me. This is from the Berkshire Glass Works. It's called a witch cane or a glass cane. And they have no particular purpose. The only two purposes I've ever found was to hang it over your doorway to keep the evil spirits away. That's why they call them a witch cane. And the other thing is that a glass blower, the great honor of a glass blower would to have a majorette carry their cane in a parade. So they worked very, very hard. And a lot of times, at the end of the day, they would show off their talents. And I have a fair amount of canes. And to see the evolution of a cane, you would know if it was an advanced glass blower or if it was an amateur. And most of the amateur canes are solid glass. Making a hollow glass cane and twisting it like this was. Some of these become very, very delicate and very beautiful and very straight. I have some that are this long, and that's very difficult to do because glass is a very poor conductor of heat. They have to work with it very, very fast. Like I said, they're cooking it and they're working at it 2,800 degrees. By the time they get to the workbench, probably 2,500 degrees. So once it gets below, I think they can't really work with it below 1,500 degrees temperature. It becomes too difficult. So they have to get back in the oven. They have to in and out of the oven constantly. And they're working together as a team. And so at the end of the day, they would have the novices, the journeymen playing around, making canes. They're teaching them, and they're showing them how they. I've seen the most beautiful work in my whole life that would come out of Berkshire County because of these talented glass blowers. And if glass canes weren't so delicate, I would have brought some beautiful, beautiful examples to show you. But I excavated there. The best way to prove anything is to visit the site. You can research all day long in any place you want, whether it's the Berkshire Historical Society, the Berkshire Library, the Athenaeum. You can research all day long. There is nothing more knowledgeable than going to the site and digging up fragments and seeing how these people work and finding the dump where they were, seeing the evolution. And it confirms a lot of things, and it confuses you at the same time. Before I get into this piece here, it's when Berkshire started making aqua glass, clear glass first. This color is called aqua because it's got a touch of green in it. The only way you can get clear glass is to add a decolorization agent, and one of them is arsenic, and the other one is manganese. If you use manganese as a strange decolorization agent, these glass formulas were highly kept secrets, and there was people that just knew the right amount of minerals to add the right color, who had the secret formula for secret colors, and they were very, very secretive, and you rarely ever find a formula for glass making. And so to make glass clear, like this bottle is, you had to use just the right amount of manganese. If you use too much, you got purple glass. And what happens is you could have a bottle that is perfectly clear, but eventually the ultraviolet rays in the sun causes the amethyst, causes it to turn purple. So if you leave glass in a window, a lot of times people have very fine crystal. If it's in the window, it'll start to turn purple. Not a thing you can do about it. It's manganese is doing its own little magical thing. I bought this. This is probably the most confusing piece of glass I've ever found in my life. It's got several histories. It's slag glass. This was thrown away. It's got, you can tell the ground was here, and this was broken from another larger piece as it hit the ground. Glass for it to be usable has to be annealed. Annealing glass is a reverse process. They would cook a piece of glass like this cane. They would make it. When they were all done with it, they put it in a hot oven and let it cool down very slowly over a 24-hour period, and that's called annealing. If you don't anneal glass, you end up with very fragile, very brittle glass, like slag glass, because this is unannealed glass just thrown away, and it breaks very easily. I know, just recently, my daughter saved a whole bunch of small pieces of glass. She wanted to make a necklace. So I bought a diamond drill, and I tried to drill it. It was falling apart, as I was literally falling apart. If I started to drill this, I would know that this would crumble. And it's too heavy anyway for a necklace. Maybe in your... So anyway, I bought this at a tag sale from a gentleman that said it was Berkshire glass. It was very, very confusing, and I've never known them to use, this is called opaque glass, or we call it milk glass. The olive green I have seen there before, olive green is just iron oxide in the glass. Actually, the green in this here is the slightest bit. You can't get glass any clearer than this naturally from the ground, and it just has a bit of iron oxide. And that's what this has got to make it green. This is actually these two are exactly the same color. This is thick, and this is very thin. If you took this and you look down, you would see the green much stronger. Same thing with window glass. If you look on it at edge, it gets greener. And if you hold it flat, it's perfectly clear to the eye. So I knew that this glass, so it drove me crazy. The guy said that this came from, or he thought it came from the Berkshire Glass Works. I had no reason to doubt him. It was $5. It wasn't like he was trying to sell me some rare work of art. So I had this thing for 2 years, and I asked everybody. So finally, I met Ray Barlow. Ray Barlow lived in New Hampshire, and he wrote the book on sandwich glass, 5 volumes, with a woman by the name of Joan Kaiser. Ray Barlow is probably one of the foremost, he now passed away, was one of the foremost glass experts in New England, in the Northeast. And I showed it to him. And he said, this is really interesting because the Berkshire Glass Works closed in 1907. And he says, in this country, that orange wasn't been able to make by any glass factory in the United States until after 1920. So the glass to be made had to come out of Germany because Germany had the secret formulas. And they weren't going to share it with anybody because people had to buy it from them if they wanted it. So I said, all right, it makes sense, but, how in the world would the Berkshire glass care? Ray said, well, maybe it didn't come from there. Maybe, one thing that was like stories get passed on, oral history is worth its weight in paper. It doesn't have any value. You can't prove oral history. So I was going crazy, and I knew that the green exists. I've seen that green before. And all of a sudden, I'm digging at the Berkshire Glass Works one day, and sure enough, I found a piece of the orange, a little tiny piece of the orange slag. And I said, oh my God. I said, that proves to me that there was orange. So I get back on the phone, I call Ray. I said, Ray, I excavated a piece of orange glass. And he said, well, I put a lot of thought into this. And he said, what it was probably experimental glass by the Berkshire Glass Works. And they were buying the glass from Germany and bringing it in, and they were playing with it, and that's exactly what this was. And those type of things can drive you crazy. The glass is sold, it's called cullets, pieces of colored glass. They sold it, it's like tubes. Iron is sold in pigs, and glass is sold in cullets. And this is actually quite beautiful because it has purple, yellow, white, and orange opaque. And so this was a failed experiment. They were playing with it, and you're talking about two different consistency of glass trying to mix them together. And what happens is, it's not that they're not compatible, but they're different temperatures. You're talking about two different personalities. This glass reacts to different temperatures at different ways at different temperatures than this does. And yet they're trying to combine the two. It's very difficult to do. But I don't know of any glass from the Berkshire that was successful. So it remained, this piece remained strictly experimental, and it didn't work, mixing the opaque glass. But that was a really fun thing. It took me almost 2 to 3 years to figure this out. And if I hadn't found a piece of fragment excavating at the Berkshire Glass Works, I would still be a mystery today because you can't prove it. So digging is very, very important, you know. And so even though I don't consider myself an archaeologist, I don't dig the way they do. I dig faster and more of a bull. But I'm also ahead of the bulldozer. I dug for almost a year at the Berkshire site, and I'm digging in people's backyards. And it's a lot of fun digging there because everybody, the property lines there in Berkshire, everybody owns a piece of that glassworks, and you never know. I mean, I could be digging in this guy's property, and my foot could be in this person, my hand could be there, and my tools are in this other neighbor's property. But all the neighbors there were the most wonderful people I ever met in my life. They all came out. They were actually excited to see me show up because they come over, what are you doing? This is my property, what are you doing? And I start telling them, and they go, wow, and they sit down. You know, they listen, and they become friends. And before you know it, you're invited to their house, and you see their treasures, their glass canes, and they brick. Then they got 5 million questions about things when they made gardens. You know, they want to know what's all the stuff that they excavated. And it was fun to share that with the neighbors. But then there was this one neighbor, I didn't meet her. She decided she wanted a garden. She hired a bulldozer, and the bulldozer came in, bulldozed the site over. It's a very important historical site is now a vegetable garden, you know. I wanted to, if I had met this woman, I would have bought her a lifetime gift certificate at Guido's. You know, she left the site open. But that's actually, in a way, that's the bad news for me. The good news is it's encapsulated, we call it. She covered it, filled it all in, and is using it in the garden. It's still there for the future. Somebody, maybe 50, 100 years from now, it'll be there. They'll excavate it. There'll be another me, you know. I have friends that go digging in that area. But I was very, very lucky. One day I went there with my friend Bill DeLego, and he lives in one of the owner's houses. All those houses somehow, unless it's brand new, was associated with the glass factory. We went there one day, and sitting in this one little area was this, and I thought I died and went to heaven. This is a piece of the crucible. Crucible is the pot they cook glass in. This is the single, if you remember earlier, I said it's very expensive to have a glass house. Well, this is probably the most expensive object besides the glass itself in the glassworks, because there was no room for error. They had very skilled people making these crucibles, and they couldn't have any air pockets because they were cooking glass. This pot had to withstand 2,800 degrees temperature. This had to remain a solid, unaffected by the heat at 2,800 degrees, to give you an idea how important this thing. If there was a bit of liquid or a bit concealed inside here, or even an air pocket inside this thing, at that temperature, this would explode. And when a crucible exploded, it was horrible. I mean, people died. They blew up the furnaces. Not only did they blow up the crucible, furnaces were very expensive. And so this was probably the single most expensive part, most complicated, and it's very difficult to make these. They build them.
Question.
Sure.
Excuse me. What do they use for fuel for these crucibles?
I'll come to that.
Oh, excuse me.
No, it's a good question though. And actually, the fuel is actually the key reason why we don't have the Berkshires here. I mean, the glassworks in the Berkshires, or it didn't last any longer than it did. The crucibles had to be built with clay, almost like a coil, very carefully around. They had, I saw a picture of a vat where there was men, early print, men standing in almost like they would stamping grapes with their feet, working the clay to the right consistency, getting the air out. They had to get the air out. If you come up and look at this later, if you see any bubbles, it's not from the clay, it's from the hot glass eating its way into the pot itself. So that was probably the single most expensive besides the vat of glass. The vat of glass was very important because it was labor intensive. They had to put in the sand, they had to get the right formulas, they had to have the fuel, keep it going all the time. I'll talk about the fuel. The fuel is charcoal. Yes. What happens is, as far as I can tell, a lot of the French Canadians came down, and they were the charcoal, they were the lumberjacks. Then they set up camps in the woods, and they would cut trees down. They would make their own mud furnaces right there in the woods. They would stack the wood just the right way. They would know how to do it, and then they would cover it all with clay, and they would smolder. They would let it smolder. They would burn it inside, making it. Then they would take and they would haul it. But the glassworks wasn't the only one. Glassworks was not the only one demanding this. The ironworks were up and roaring, and there was a big demand for them. They had to keep the glassworks. The ironworks also cooked iron at 2,800 degrees temperature, and they used blast furnaces. They had huge air tunnels where they brought the air, forced the air in, more oxygen, which would burn more charcoal. There's a book I'm going to hand out if anybody wants to get really technical. I brought with me a list of books that I could recommend, and one of them is called 200 Years of Soot and Sweat. There's an industrial archaeologist by the name of Victor Rolando in Vermont, wrote a wonderful book, and he covers the charcoal industry pretty thoroughly. The paper industry, everybody was using charcoal. It was really in big demand. If you saw Berkshire County in 1890, it was barren. There were no trees. Almost all the trees you see today are second or third growth trees. Very few virgin forests anymore. A lot of things changed. Very, very quickly, unrelated. 80%, I heard 80% of the land was cleared of glacial rocks to make fields. So when we're driving around Berkshire County, we don't see rocks. We look at it and say, oh, I wonder why it was so hard for people to come here. Well, we don't see what it looked like. It was very, very difficult. Think about any road in Berkshire County, it winds. Why did it wind? Because it was originally an Indian path going around the rock. And then the early settlers came and they made it a little wider, but they still had to go around the rock. Well, the rock didn't disappear for many, many years. In some cases, it didn't disappear at all. But the bend in the road always stayed. It might have gotten a little subtler as the rock disappeared, but there's a bend in the road there. Well, it's because there were these obstacles that they had to get around, and large obstacles. And could be a rock, could be ledge, or whatever the case may be. The charcoal industry was a whole interesting industry all by itself, which is a good time to mention that when we researched early industries, these sub-industries, these industries that supported the bigger industries, we discovered there's very little written about it. Nowhere could I find a book on the sand industry, making sand for the glassworks. Nowhere in the United States, I've written everywhere, there is not a published article from the past anywhere. There's nothing published that I could find dealing with the lime industry. They had to use lime in certain industries like glassmaking. It was used as a catalyst in glassmaking. They had to cook the lime. It was calcium carbonate when it came out of the ground, or calcium chloride when it came from the ground. The other way, carbonate. And they cooked it at 800 degrees, and they made it into calcium carbonate, so chloride, so it could be used in the industry. The paper industry used it. The iron industry also used lime as a catalyst, as well as the glassmaking industry. The charcoal industry, there's very little written about to do this, how to build. And we came to the conclusion that they were stealing tradespeople out of Europe in the middle of the night. They were making them offers they couldn't refuse. And the reason why they had to steal people is because industries, especially the glass industry, as badly and as strongly as they hoarded their formulas, they kept their prime people protected. And they didn't want other glassworks to steal them away. Well, this country went over there, and we were the promised land. We were booming. It was very appealing. They could come here, make more money, have a better place to live. And so they would lure them out in the middle of the night. And these people came with this knowledge in their heads. And that's why we were able to have a lot of these industries that are not written, except today. Now there's people like Victor Rolando, Ed Kirby, Alan Plant, many people researching this stuff to the nth degree, and is actually publishing books on this, solving some of these mysteries. But I haven't even had any luck finding books in Europe yet dealing with this. I've written to people. I've written to the Colorado Museum and the Colorado School of Mines, and I get, I don't know what it is about professors or colleges. If you ask them a question they can't answer, they answer something else. They don't ever send, I never gotten something back saying, we don't know. That's a good question. Never gotten that back. Funny, some of the material I've gotten back, they were wonderful, and they took valuable time to send me stuff, and they felt really obligated, and we really tweaked our questions, I mean, for these people. So we did our best. But we were asking questions they obviously didn't have answers for. So anyway, the Farmer Glass Works, I'm going to go over it very quickly, was from 1812 to 1814, very short-lived. Then there was the Cheshire glass that the gentleman that built 1812 to 1814 as well. And then years later, they dug a hole in the ground to build a grist mill, and they found this rich sand, sadly to say, underneath this guy. You probably would have been very successful glassworks. But there was another attempt at glassworks in Cheshire, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with Scrabbletown. Scrabbletown, if you go to the only light in town, you take a right, and cross the brook and across the railroad tracks, that area is called, the railroad tracks first, then the brook. That area is called Scrabbletown. I think it's because the Italian and the Irish lived in that same area, and they weren't too happy with each other. But there was in 1847, they built the glassworks that lasted to 1865. Lennoxdale has two histories, 1765 to 1820, the earliest, which is the least amount known so far. Then there was the Lennox Glass Company that lasted from 1853 to 1872. Now, again, it had all to do with the fuel, the cost of fuel. They got to a point where there really wasn't any charcoal. They were reaching out further and further and further to get charcoal. They were running out of forest. So they started bringing in coal from Pennsylvania by train, and the train cost was absolutely outrageous. And so the Berkshire Glassworks started in 1854, and they closed in 1907. And they didn't close because there was no business. They closed because they could not compete with glass companies closer to the fuel source. You know, natural gas and coal. They didn't have to ship it. It was very close to them. They could haul it in by wagons. So the company, I don't think, as far as I know, the company didn't go out of business. They closed, and they took whatever was salvageable, and they moved it, I'm pretty sure, to either New Jersey or to Philadelphia. But they stayed in business, and I don't know how much longer after that. It's fascinating to read and to interview. I have interviewed descendants from Glassworks, and it's fascinating. One gentleman by the name of Jim Best, a very, very tall man, and his family was very involved. His family was glass blowers and glass cutters, and worked at the Berkshire Glass Works. And it's fun to talk to these people and read about and talk about their personalities, their talents, where they came from, and it's a very, very rich history we have in Berkshire County. We have no idea how fortunate we are to live here. I'm only talking about one small aspect. I could be talking about the lime industry, I could be talking about the iron industry, which was even much bigger than the glass industry, or the paper industry. It's fascinating to talk about that. Anybody have any questions? I could go on all night long. Yes.
How big was that crucible?
I actually had a mathematician from the Lennox High School figure out the circumference. I think this was about 3.5, 4 feet. I can't remember around. It's a good sized crucible. Yeah. You're welcome to. This was obviously aqua glass. You can tell by the layers of it. This is actually eaten down a little bit from the heat, and it's glazed with the glass. The outside is the natural glaze, I think, or that could be glass as well. This is actually not part of the crucible, but this is actually part of the floor that they stood on. This came from the crucible that was cooking cobalt blue glass. And, so I don't know if these came from the same place, but this is the floor. They were spilling it as they were taking it out, and just accumulation of glass. I'll talk about different things when I'm over here. This crucible is from the Berkshire Glass Works. This is Berkshire glass here. This piece of fragment is from Lennoxdale. There's no way of knowing. If I didn't know where I got this, I wouldn't know where this came from. There's nothing tattletale about it. This is just a window glass, aqua glass they were making there. They made mostly aqua glass or window glass in Lennoxdale. I do know that there was one little attempt at making colored glass, but I don't think it was very successful. Berkshire Glass made an array of colors. This is a window in a church in Berkshire, and this is the solid. This is they would make big sheets of solid. They would sell it to one of their customers was Tiffany. It was Comfort Tiffany. And another customer was a guy by the name of Frederick Cronenshield from Boston, an artist, also made a lot of stained glass windows, and they would buy it. And so this is translucent glass with patterns to it. And then eventually they got very tricky and started swirls. And they have one glass they called, which somebody gave me an example of, it's called Christmas glass. It's green glass with wonderful, almost like marbleizing of red glass going through it. They were very, very proud of that. It's very hard to find and not long-lived. Some of these colors are really beautiful. I have a wonderful lampshade that was made for me by one of the gentlemen that lives in Berkshire Village. He's a very good friend of mine. He's as crazy about the glass as I am. And he's a stained glass guy. So he, over the years since he was a kid, collected fragments of stained glass that he dug, and he made me a lampshade. And I have every color that he could possibly find. It's a beautiful piece. This is a sample of what they called the whitebacks, the money that they issue. They owned everything, the glassworks. They owned the housing. They owned the store. They even printed their own currency, which was usable in the city of Pittsfield. It was such a successful business and so well respected that even though you went away from the Berkshires, I think they would charge you 10% if you went to a store for processing it. And that's not bad. But the glass blowers, unfortunately, I don't know why, but maybe the type of lifestyle, they were all very heavy drinkers. And so the glassworks owned the pub. So whatever they got paid, they got the money back. And it's kind of sad in a way, but they owed their soul to the country store, right? As the song goes. And they also, I think because of pollution, whatever have you, but glass blowers usually lived to their 50s. Unfortunately, they didn't live very long. So there's a little sad ending to the whole lecture. This is actually a rondelle. This is actually a rondelle that was cut square. They saved the bullseye. That's where the ponto went. This is where they would attach the blowpipe to the end of the thing. It would have been a much smaller blowpipe than this to make something, a rondelle, and much more manageable, much lighter. A blowpipe could have been about this size and much longer to make that, to spin it. But this is actually a pretty nice piece. And it became a style, a bullseye, and people would actually, even today, sometimes have this made for the window over the doorway, the transit over the doorway. This piece here is what I call frozen foam. We find this once in a while. The glass basically foamed up, and they would skim it off and throw it out, and that's what this is. This is foam. Sometimes the foam is you get a big piece of foam, and you lift it up, and you know it's glass. You lift it up, it's like light. It's got no weight to it. This is pretty heavy because it's got a little ground mixed in. I mean, this was just thrown out, you know, and it's kind of heavy and kind of solid. Somebody else had their hand up. Yes?
I have a sun porch with wavy glass. When you look through
Yeah,
it,
that's.
everything is wavy.
I didn't get into the different processes. I get into rondelle, and I got into cylindrical glass. They actually poured glass out on tables, and that's very wavy. The waviness in glass really didn't get out until, I would say, 1900, 1930s. Glass like we know of today. It stayed pretty wavy. They still, I mean, you're still working with very, very hot material, and there's really very little control over consistency, making it perfect. They did the best they can. Well, I like wavy glass, and sometimes you can tell. If there's no pattern to the wave, it just kind of goes around. That was probably poured out on a table. They had big tables, they would pour it out, and they had a roller that went over it. And that's, chances are pretty good that's what that is. And then, of course, it could have been a cylindrical glass where they folded it out and then they cut windows out. Where's your home?
On Main Street, it was built in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
Main Street in
Yeah.
Dalton. It's an old house.
Sure.
But the sun porch is all that wave. You look through it
Yeah.
and the trees are all wavy.
Yeah. I know it's kind of fun in a way. Yeah. Yeah, the modern glass today is boring, isn't it? Any other questions?
Yes, you mentioned sand, sandstone, and quartzite. Now, that sand, did you get that, did you crush that up
Yeah.
with sandstone?
Right. This was this.
It was, you crushed it yourself?
Right.
Okay.
The other thing I didn't get into, there's so much to talk about, you can't really cover it all. But when they first started my quarrying sand, because the outcropping of the stone was exposed to rain and winter, that was the easiest. That was pulverized. You could almost pick it up. I did it. When I went on top of the mountain of the quarry, I picked up sandstone, and you can take it and hold it in your hand and almost crumble it into sand. And the deeper you got, the further away from the rain seeping into the rock and the coldness, the freezing, the harder the rock got. Some of it was unbelievable. I mean, some of the rock at the quarry, bless you, some of the rock in the quarry was as hard as this clay pot. It was like this. And a very difficult. And the reason I'm telling you that, because think about these men, just backbreaking work, pounding with hammers. I think what happened, I'll very quickly get into, they crushed the sand. They got the rocks, they crushed it somehow. I'm not 100% sure. I know how they did the process after 1875. Before 1875, we're not quite sure how they crushed the sand. It's not written anywhere. This is one of the confusing things. Then after it was sand, it was washed. They washed out the feldspar. Then they took it in wheelbarrows and they brought it out to big tables. And they flattened it out, they spread it on the big tables and let the sun dry it. Then after it was dry from the sun, they would shovel it into barrels. And they covered it up to make sure it stayed dry. And that's the way the glass factories received the sand. Or if they shipped it, they brought it to the railroad companies. They shipped it by railroad to wherever, or wagons. You know, the railroads came in 1840. They were sending wagons of barrels of sand to Sandwich, which was quite a distance. I have no idea how long it took them, but it took them a long time. There were no bridges. I know of in 1840 there were barges going across the Connecticut River and stuff like that. So it was quite a trip. And they had wagons going almost every few days to Sandwich. So that was backbreaking work. And sometimes the water went in the wintertime in fissures. Fissures, little cracks, natural cracks in ground, and then that would blow things apart. So at the end of the winter, they would have rocks blown apart. but they would use black powder a little bit. We couldn't, I didn't see any signs of black powder being used at the Washington quarry, where I spent most of our time. Yes?
Now, is that sand, has that been all mined, or
No.
it's just not valuable anymore?
No, it's just not invaluable anymore. The process for making glass today is so sophisticated. They're making glass purer than they ever could make, and they don't need the quality. I don't know why. I talked to, there's a glass artist by the name of Tom Patty, and he and I talk about glass all the time. He gets his glass out of Pittsburgh, and we talk about it all the time. And he shows me what's coming out of glass factories today. It's pure, stronger, better glass, and they're making it cheaper than ever. Actually, the glass that your fine cut crystal is made out of is a poor grade glass. And it's very brittle, and it chips very easily, but it's beautiful. It's almost like prisms where they cut it and the sun hits it. It's really the beauty that makes it valuable. It's really not good glass. It's nowhere near the quality of a Coca-Cola bottle. Coca-Cola bottle, soda bottles are really fine quality glass because they're hardy. You can drop them and not break. Drop a punch bowl, a cut glass punch bowl. It's history. You drop a Coke bottle or a soda bottle today on a glass, it bounces and you pick it up, you know?
Can I tell Ann Mintz that you told me to drop our punch bowl?
Yes, yes, as an experiment.
Yes.
Yes, for science, yes.
Always for science.
Yes. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I want to thank Mr. Flint for coming. He's not a stranger here. This is his third time now. He's done the antique appraisal fair for us. And now tonight, as I said, we heard you before. This is
Yes.
a great discussion.
Yes.
And I think what you talk about and what you show us are really worth a lot more than some of the things that come in from appraisal fairs, which are lovely, right, Joyce? Our commission and guests, and thank you again very much.
You're
And if you
welcome.
go on a dig, maybe some of us would
Oh.
like to go with you.
No, I'll talk about that.
Okay.
1 second.
Yes, go. Please.
I did an exposition or a field trip twice now for the Lennox Historical Society as a fundraiser. And I offer a field trip free. I mean, I will do it for you if you want to do it as a fundraiser. Or if you just want to get a group of people together. And the field trip consists of, we'll all meet at the entrance or the Appalachian Trail where it crosses the entrance into the upper part of Lake Ashley.
Okay.
Then we walk in and around Lake Ashley, and then I will first come across the cellar holes where the people lived that worked in the quarry. We walk up to the quarry. I go into great discussion, and Ed Kirby, the geologist I worked with, said he would be glad to do this too as well. And then I will, from there, we can walk down Roaring Brook to the wash house, and I can explain to you what we found and bring you up to date on that. So if you ever want to do a field trip, I offer that.
We'd like to, if it's on the members of the commission.
Anybody?
we'd love
In
to,
the
and our
springtime
guests
or in the
too.
fall? In as much as we had snow already.
No, I would say after the frost is out of the ground, and it's not muddy anymore, would be the best time. The other thing I offer anybody, these are 4 books that are very hard to get, and the books I use the most. And one of them is Exploring the Berkshires by Ed Kirby. One is Western Mass Mineral Localities by Alan Plant. They're both geologists. Another one by Ed Kirby is called Echoes of Iron. And they all talk about a lot of the things I talked about here tonight. And the other one is 200 Years of Soot and Sweat, if you want to know about the charcoal industry and lime. It covers both beautiful books, fun to read if you're interested. So these are here. And the other thing is what I talked about tonight in a genealogical order, if you would like, of the glass works in Berkshire County. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next time we see you, we'll have a shovel with us.
Okay.
I'll write your down.